before the soft glow of bedside lamps, before memory foam, and long before scrolling through phones under the covers, humans slept differently. The history of sleep is not just a tale of how we rest. It is a mirror reflecting how our ancestors lived, believed, and coped with the world once the sun dipped below the horizon. Long before electricity sliced the night into manageable hours, sleep was intimately tied to nature. People followed the rhythm of the sun, the seasons, and the stars. The night was not a time to dominate, but a realm of mystery, filled with stillness, shadows, and superstition. A world without artificial light. In a time when candles were precious and firewood required effort, nightfall arrived with finality. Once the sun set, the world grew dark, truly dark. There were no street lamps humming outside your window, no refrigerators buzzing in the corner, and no neon clocks to glance at. The night was thick and encompassing. Homes had only the barest of glows from a hearth or a flickering oil lamp. In such darkness, the body and mind responded differently than they do today. Melatonin levels, our sleep hormone, were naturally higher, unbothered by blue light or digital screens. People began winding down earlier. Sleep was not a luxury. It was a response to an environment that demanded rest when the light was gone. The pattern of two sleeps. Perhaps the most fascinating discovery in sleep history is the phenomenon of segmented sleep, or as some scholars call it, first sleep and second sleep. Historical documents, personal letters, diaries, and even medical texts from medieval Europe and colonial America describe people going to bed shortly after dusk, sleeping for a few hours, then waking in the middle of the night for an hour or two before returning to bed. This middle period, called the watch, was considered a normal part of life. People would rise quietly, tend to the fire, reflect, pray, write, or even engage in quiet conversation or intimacy. Some even used the time to check on livestock or ensure that doors remain latched. This natural biphasic rhythm aligned with human biology. Studies have shown that in darkness, humans naturally fall into a sleep pattern that includes a waking period in the night. In modern terms, our 8-hour expectation is a relatively new invention, shaped more by factory schedules and electric lighting than biology. Beds were not always for sleep. The idea of a bed as a private sanctuary is a modern luxury. In earlier centuries, beds were often shared, not just by spouses, but by children, servants, even travelers or neighbors in need. The concept of a guest room did not exist. People bundled together for warmth and safety. In colder climates, multiple family members often slept in the same bed, under layers of wool and fur. And these beds, far from our cushioned cocoons, they were often simple wooden frames filled with straw, hay, feathers, or even dried leaves. The term hitting the hay isn't metaphorical, it's literal. In wealthier homes, the bedding might be luxurious, with embroidered linens and plush bolsters. But in most households, it was practical scratchy, and shared. The sounds of silence. In a modern world, we often crave silence. But in pre-modern times, silence could be unsettling. Without the hum of machines or traffic, the night was truly quiet, except for the creaks of wooden beams, the howls of wind, the occasional cry of an animal, or distant thunder. These sounds carried meaning. A howling dog might be seen as an omen. An owl's screech could signal death. A still night after a long day of noise could feel eerie, even terrifying. Many people in the past found comfort in rhythmic, predictable sounds. That is why hearth fires were rarely extinguished. They gave both light and a sense of life. A crackling fire soothed the mind, much like white noise machines do today. In colder months, it wasn't unusual for someone to stir in the night just to add a log and ensure warmth for the second sleep. Nighttime superstitions and fears. With darkness came dread. Many feared that nightfall opened a portal to the unseen. Evil spirits, witches, goblins, or restless souls were believed to roam after dark. To counter this, people would hang protective charms, recite prayers before bed, and avoid whistling at night. In parts of Europe, salt was sprinkled by the bed to ward off dark forces. Dreams, too, were taken seriously. In a world without scientific explanation, dreams were viewed as messages, warnings, or divine guidance. A dream of falling could signal misfortune. Dreaming of water might warn of betrayal. People passed down interpretations through generations, treating dreams as a nocturnal form of prophecy. This fear of night shaped behaviors. Windows were bolted, doors double-barred, and candles placed by the bedside. Children were told bedtime stories that often included moral lessons and monsters, reinforcing the idea that the dark held consequences. The role of warming pans and bedfellows. Staying warm was more than a comfort. It was a necessity. Cold killed. Before central heating, people used warming pans. Metal pans filled with hot coals, slipped between bed sheets before sleeping. These had to be used carefully to avoid burns or fires. Wealthy households had servants tasked with preparing beds this way, while poorer families relied on body heat. This brings us back to the idea of shared beds. Being alone in bed was not just lonely, it was dangerous. A shared bed meant shared heat, shared comfort, and in many cases, a shared watch against the night. Even in monasteries, where silence was sacred, monks often slept in dormitories, not just for discipline, but for warmth and mutual care. The modern idea of a king-size bed for one or two people would have seemed both wasteful and decadent. When sleep was not safe, not everyone could sleep soundly. In villages at war or regions facing raids, people slept with one eye open. Some homes had sleeping lofts or hidden compartments for protection. Bandits were known to roam at night, and locks were rudimentary at best. For some, night work was inevitable. Watchmen patrolled, midwives stayed awake for births, and farmers checked livestock under the moonlight. These nocturnal tasks added layers of meaning to the act of sleep, making it not just a biological need, but a precious, fragile act of trust. The birth of sleep as a private ritual. As societies grew and technology advanced, sleep began to change. Glass windows replaced wooden shutters. Beds became status symbols. Nighttime reading became possible thanks to oil lamps and later gas lighting. But in the pre-modern era, sleep was more communal, more sacred, and in many ways, more natural. It followed the rhythm of nature, acknowledged the presence of darkness, and wove together biology with belief. What we now call insomnia might simply have been a natural watch period of segmented sleep. What we now consider nightmares were once regarded as omens. The quiet simplicity of sleeping in a one-room cottage, surrounded by loved ones and protected by charms, was both practical and deeply rooted in the values of the time. When we think of a bed, most of us picture a raised structure, sturdy, comfortable, draped in linen, maybe even surrounded by pillows. But sleep didn't always happen on beds, at least not in the way we imagine them today. The story of where humans have chosen to rest is just as telling as how they've done it. The place of sleep has always reflected status, environment, and survival. In this chapter, we trace that journey from crude resting spots in caves and huts to shared sleeping spaces in longhouses and castles to the eventual rise of private bedrooms as we know them today. The earliest sleepers, hearths and hides. Let us start at the beginning. Early humans likely slept wherever they found safety and warmth. In caves, the inner chambers farthest from predators were chosen. Sleep happened on hides, grass, or sometimes just the ground. Bones of prehistoric humans suggest they preferred spaces close to fires, both for warmth and to deter nocturnal threats. These sleep areas were not private. They were communal. Everyone huddled together. Elders, children, warriors, all sharing body heat and alertness in shifts. This early arrangement planted the seeds for what would become a cultural norm for thousands of years. That sleep was a shared, collective experience. The communal spirit of sleep. As humans developed more permanent structures, the design of living spaces changed, but the communal nature of sleep remained. In longhouses used by indigenous groups in North America, Scandinavia, and parts of Asia, entire families and sometimes extended clans slept in one giant room. There were no bedrooms. The hearth was central, and bedding was laid out around it. In agricultural communities, this practice made sense. It was warmer, it fostered a sense of safety, and it allowed people to wake and work together with the rising sun. In ancient Rome and Greece, wealthier citizens had separate sleeping chambers, but these were often functional rather than luxurious. Poorer families continued to sleep together in one room, sometimes even with livestock nearby. In medieval Europe, the trend was much the same. Commoners often lived in single-room homes where life, cooking, work, and sleep all happened in one space. Privacy, as we understand it today, was a foreign concept. The rise of the bed frame. By the early Middle Ages, wealthier families began to distinguish their sleeping areas with elevated bed frames. These were more than just practical. They were symbolic. A raised bed kept people away from damp ground, pests, and cold drafts. They were also incredibly difficult to move, often passed down through generations. These beds were not just for rest. They became thrones of sorts, where lords conducted meetings, where noble women gave birth, and where the dying received final visitors. Curtains around beds became common in noble households, not for romance, but to hold in heat and block out drafts in stone castles. These canopies and heavy drapes gave birth to a new concept, a private cocoon for sleep. It was the first whisper of the modern bedroom. Sleep in social hierarchies. Who you shared a bed with said a lot about who you were. In noble households, it was common for ladies in waiting or servants to sleep near their masters, sometimes even in the same bed, not out of affection, but because of duty, safety, and warmth. In inns, strangers might share a bed due to lack of space. Even kings and queens often shared sleeping quarters, not always with each other, but with guards or close attendants. The bedchamber was not yet the sacred, solo sanctuary it has become today. For servants, apprentices, and enslaved individuals, sleep often happened in kitchens, barns, hallways, or attic crawl spaces, wherever a warm spot could be found. There was no illusion of rest being a right. It was a function of labor and hierarchy, night clothing and bed accessories. As beds became more defined, so too did the accessories of sleep. By the 17th century, Europeans developed a culture of sleepwear. Long nightshirts, caps to retain heat, and layered blankets became the norm. Pillows grew in popularity. Feather beds and straw mattresses competed in quality, though both attracted bugs. Bedding was often filled with hay, wool, or rushes. The wealthier could afford down feathers, and these became symbols of luxury. It wasn't just about comfort, it was about class. A soft bed meant you didn't labor all day. It meant you had servants, titles, and influence. Cultural differences in sleep spaces. Globally, not everyone embraced beds the same way. In Japan, sleeping on tatami mats with futons that rolled out each night and were stored by day created multifunctional living spaces. In many African and indigenous American communities, mats, skins, or simply the ground remained the norm well into the 19th century. In Islamic cultures, especially in warmer climates, sleep often happened outdoors, on flat roofs, or in courtyards. Hammocks became widespread in Central and South America, not just for ease, but for health, as they protected sleepers from crawling insects. Each culture crafted its sleeping environment based on environment, needs, and customs. The idea of a fixed, padded, framed bed was largely Western and reserved for those who could afford it. The industrial age, private bedrooms emerge. With industrialization came walls. More specifically, walls within homes. As families began to earn more and homes became larger, the idea of individual bedrooms emerged. Children got separate rooms. Guests were hosted in spare rooms. Sleep became more solitary. Privacy, once a luxury, became an expectation. This was also the era when doctors and social reformers began advocating for clean sleep. Fresh air, tidy sheets, and quiet rooms were promoted as necessary for health. The bedroom was rebranded from a communal nest to a personal sanctuary. And with this, the bed itself transformed from a functional resting place to a design statement. Headboards, brass frames, matching linens, and eventually spring mattresses turned the sleeping area into a zone of comfort, style, and personal expression. From hearth to haven, the story of where we sleep is deeply human. It tells us how people lived, what they feared, how they survived cold nights and dangerous ones, and what sleep meant to them. Today, a bedroom is often the most private space we have, locked, personalized, and curated. But it was not always so. Sleep used to be a shared event, filled with noise, movement, and people. It was a communal rite of rest. From caves to castles, mats to memory foam, the journey has been long. But no matter the century or setting, one thing has always been true. Sleep, at its core, is a sacred surrender. And where we choose to do it reveals much about who we are. Sleeping with the seasons, how weather and light shaped human rest. In our temperature-controlled world, the changing seasons rarely dictate how or when we sleep. But for most of human history, sleep was a seasonal act. The weather outside did not just influence the mood. It shaped the entire rhythm of sleep. Before modern insulation, electric lighting, and central heating, human sleep patterns followed the natural calendar with surprising precision. The amount of daylight, the intensity of cold or heat, and the presence of storms or still nights. These dictated when people retired to bed, how long they stayed there, and even the quality of the dreams they had. This chapter explores the powerful influence of seasons on sleep throughout history. From winter's long nights that pulled people in a hibernation-like rest, to summer's short, hot nights that split sleep and kept windows open to the unknown. The long sleep of winter. In pre-industrial societies, winter was the sleep season. Days were short, nights were long, and life moved slowly. Agricultural work dwindled. Travel was reduced. Families stayed indoors as much as possible. With nothing but candles and firelight, people naturally went to bed early, sometimes as soon as dusk settled. In parts of Europe, winter meant 14 to 16 hours of darkness. People didn't fight it, they surrendered to it. This wasn't lazy or indulgent. It was survival. The cold pushed people into bed early, where they shared warmth under heavy covers. In some parts of rural France and England, Records describe people sleeping up to 10 hours or more during winter months. Workdays were shorter and bodies needed more energy to stay warm. In many homes, the bed became the center of winter life. People did not just sleep in it. They ate there, read by candlelight, played quiet games, or even conducted business. In cold stone homes or thatched cottages, the bed was a literal refuge. Winter routines layered sleep. Even in the cold, the segmented sleep pattern persisted. After the first sleep, people often woke up during the deep hours of the night, called the watch. This was especially true in winter. During the watch, people would stoke the fire, say prayers, or engage in soft, meaningful activities. Some kept journals. Others used the time for quiet intimacy. It was a pocket of stillness in the dead of night, when the world was at its quietest. Because of the bitter cold, special sleeping gear was common. Nightcaps covered heads. Wool socks were worn in bed. Thick quilts, sheepskins, and hand-woven blankets became treasures passed through generations. Warming pans filled with coals were slid between sheets before bed. Beds themselves were often boxed in or curtained to retain heat, creating small microclimates of warmth inside otherwise freezing homes. Spring and the awakening of restlessness. With spring came more daylight and more restlessness. As fields called for planting and animals stirred from dormancy, so too did people. Sleep became shorter and lighter. The increased sunlight signaled a shift in body rhythms. People stayed awake longer, and beds were no longer places of hibernation, but of brief recovery. Spring also brought unpredictable weather. Sudden storms, dripping rooftops, and howling winds made nights noisy and sometimes unsettling. But it was also a time of fresh air. After a long winter of smoky fires and closed windows, many homes were aired out. Bedding was beaten and refreshed. Cultural rituals around sleep also shifted. In some traditions, spring cleaning extended to the bed. Mattresses were restuffed. Sheets were scrubbed in rivers. Lavender and herbs were laid under pillows to repel insects and bring calm sleep. Summer short nights and broken sleep. Summer was the season of broken sleep. With longer daylight hours and intense heat, people often delayed sleep until well after sunset. Windows were thrown open to allow in night breezes, along with every sound from the outside world. Dogs barking, neighbors chatting, crickets chirping, it all came in. In hotter climates, people slept in shifts or napped during the day. The siesta, still practiced in parts of Spain and Italy, has its roots in this seasonal logic. Farmers would rest during the hottest hours, then work again in the cool of the evening. Because of the heat, many slept on thinner mats, straw pallets, or even on porches or rooftops. Hammocks and reed mats replaced woolen bedding. In West Africa, some families moved sleeping to outdoor spaces entirely during the hottest months. Children ran barefoot until late. Adults worked longer hours, and night became both a welcome cool down and an invitation for more activity. Fire festivals, night markets, and social gatherings often cut into sleep time. Sleep in summer became more fragmented, but also more alive. Autumn's return to routine. Autumn was a transitional time. As harvests ended and the days shortened, people began preparing for the long nights ahead. Firewood was stocked, bedding was thickened, quilts were mended, and people began to return to earlier bedtimes. This was also the season of dreams. Across cultures, autumn has long been associated with reflection, memory, and a thinning veil between the visible and invisible world. As sleep deepened with the cooling air, people paid more attention to their dreams. In some traditions, dreams in autumn were considered prophetic, especially during harvest moons or equinoxes. Sleep also took on spiritual dimensions. All Hallows Eve, Samhain, and other autumn festivals acknowledge the power of night, death, and the unseen. People went to bed with prayers, charms, and an awareness that sleep was a kind of passage, a doorway between worlds. Sleeping with the sun, a natural clock. It is important to understand that people once slept by the sun, not the clock. There was no fixed bedtime of 10 p.m. Instead, people read the signs around them. The dimming light, the cooling air, the silence of animals, and the position of the moon. Roosters, not alarms, woke the household. And the time to sleep was felt in the bones, not scheduled in apps. The seasons provided the framework. Each one offered its own tempo, its own demands. And humans followed. The disruption of artificial light. All of this changed with the rise of gas lamps and later electricity. Artificial light stretched the day unnaturally. Instead of sleeping with the darkness, people now fought against it. Workdays lengthened. Social events ran later. And slowly, sleep became less connected to the seasons and more shaped by productivity and pressure. The seasonal sleep rhythm was broken. No longer did people go to bed with the dusk or rise with the dawn. They went to bed when they were told to by factory whistles, school bells, and later, glowing screens. A loss of natural rest. In losing seasonal sleep, we also lost something sacred. We lost the quiet awe of winter's stillness, the breezy surrender of summer's heat, and the communal closeness of curling up during a thunderstorm. We lost the scent of sun-dried linen, the rhythm of first sleep and second sleep, and the freedom to rise and rest as the earth moved through its cycle. Today, many long to get away, to the mountains, the village, the cottage, places where sleep still follows the natural world. And when they do, they often find themselves sleeping longer, dreaming deeper, and waking with a kind of peace that city life rarely offers. That is not coincidence. It is memory, a memory our bodies still carry, a memory of a time when sleep was a conversation with the seasons,